A multi-million-pound divorce turns to tragedy when on the courthouse steps, a pregnant woman is brutally attacked before the cameras. The video goes viral, the country is divided, and justice becomes the stage for a war between power and truth. But when the victim awakens from a coma, the story ceases to be about revenge and becomes about rebirth. If you like stories like this, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel, and leave your comment saying where you're listening from. The High Court of Justice in London hummed with the usual tension of a busy Tuesday, but something in the air indicated that this would not be an ordinary day. Journalists crowded the main steps, cameras strategically positioned to capture what promised to be one of the year's most talked-about divorce hearings. Among the reporters, Deborah Menzies adjusted her microphone, mentally rehearsing the questions she would ask as soon as those involved emerged. It's the biggest divorce this city has ever seen. The businessman Theodore Montgomery Alistair, owner of the country's largest private hospital network, and his wife Louisa Campbell, 8 months pregnant. Rumors are that he's offering a multi-million-pound settlement to avoid scandal, she commented to her cameraman. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was no less tense. Louisa Campbell breathed deeply as her brother, Raphael Campbell, a former army captain and now a lawyer, held her hand firmly. At 35, Louisa's face bore the marks of a marriage that, behind social appearances, had become a gilded cage. Her brown eyes, once lively, now seemed weary. Even so, her prominent 8-month belly gave her surprising inner strength. "Everything will be fine, Lou. We're near the end," Raphael whispered. Just 3 rooms away, Theodore Montgomery Alistair, 50 years old, with perfectly trimmed grey hair and an Italian-cut suit, discussed in low tones with his lawyers. Beside him, Vanessa Price, 30, a model and now an entrepreneur, maintained an impeccable posture. She was Theodore's current partner, although the divorce was not yet finalized. "I don't want to see that woman. She's using this pregnancy to extort me," Theodore murmured, adjusting his silk tie. "Keep calm," replied Dr. Caldwell, his lead attorney. "Remember, there are journalists everywhere. We need to appear reasonable." When Judge Marcus Finch entered the courtroom, silence was immediate. He was a man known for his impartiality and for not tolerating procedural manipulations. He looked at both sides, at Louisa, visibly pregnant, and at Theodore with his team of 3 lawyers. This is the 3rd conciliation hearing in the divorce proceedings between Louisa Campbell and Theodore Montgomery Alistair. The parties have not reached an agreement in previous hearings. Do we have new proposals today? Dr. Caldwell rose with a document in hand. "Your Honor, my client is willing to increase the offer to a monthly allowance of £100,000, plus coverage of all medical expenses related to the pregnancy and the child until they turn 25. However, he maintains the demand that there be no public mention of alleged abusive conduct that has never been proven." Raphael Campbell immediately stood up. "With all due respect, Your Honor, my client and sister is not interested in financial agreements that come with gag clauses. What we seek is the truth and emotional reparation, not just material compensation." Judge Finch observed both sides for a few moments. The court understands the delicacy of the situation, but also recognizes Ms. Campbell's advanced state of gestation. "I suggest that the parties consider a temporary agreement aiming at the immediate well-being of the pregnant woman and the unborn child, while the more complex issues proceed to regular trial." After 3 hours of heated discussions, no agreement was reached. The judge adjourned the session, scheduling a new hearing for 2 weeks later. As those present stood up, the heavy atmosphere was almost palpable. In the courthouse corridors, Raphael tried to clear a safe path for his sister through the journalists who were already gathering. News that no agreement had been reached had spread quickly. "Louisa, how do you feel about being accused of using your pregnancy to get more money?" shouted a reporter. "Theodore, is it true you're trying to hide cases of abuse?" asked another. Raphael protected his sister as much as he could, but the commotion grew with each step. When they reached the external steps of the courthouse, a crowd had already formed. It was then that they saw Theodore and Vanessa leaving through a side door, trying to avoid reporters. For a brief moment, Louisa's and Theodore's eyes met. They were seconds laden with a complex history, of a love that had turned into control, of dreams that had become nightmares. Louisa felt the baby stir in her womb as if it too could feel the tension of the moment. What happened next was so fast that the several cameras present captured slightly different versions. Vanessa, seeing Louisa, murmured something to Theodore. He shook his head negatively, but she was already advancing towards the pregnant woman. "You think you're going to manipulate everyone with that belly, don't you?" Vanessa shouted, approaching dangerously. Raphael tried to put himself between them, but Vanessa was faster. With a calculated shove, she unbalanced Louisa, who tripped over her own feet. The images captured by journalists showed the horror in slow motion. Louisa, 8 months pregnant, losing her balance, on the marble steps of the courthouse. Raphael managed to grab his sister's arm at the last second, preventing a complete fall, but the impact had already been enough for Louisa to feel a sharp pain in her abdomen. A collective gasp echoed through the crowd. Theodore remained paralyzed, while Vanessa recoiled, seemingly shocked by the consequences of her own act. "Call an ambulance. My sister is pregnant," Raphael shouted, supporting Louisa, who was now breathing with difficulty. Courthouse security quickly cordoned off the area. Deborah Menzies, the reporter waiting for interviews, dropped her microphone and ran to help, offering water and her own coat for Louisa to lean on. "Stay calm, Louisa. Breathe deeply," Deborah said softly, while Raphael desperately called emergency services. Within minutes, ambulance sirens could be heard approaching. Theodore, finally emerging from his state of shock, tried to approach but was restrained by security. "He's my child too. Let me see how she is," he shouted, but Raphael's glare made it clear his presence was unwelcome. As paramedics arrived and began attending to Louisa, the cameras continued to record. The image of a pregnant woman attacked on the steps of a courthouse was already spreading across social media, turning a high-society London divorce case into a national symbol. Vanessa was detained by courthouse security. Her face, previously composed, was now pale and frightened. "It was an accident. I didn't mean for her to fall," she repeated, as police led her away to give a statement. On the way to the hospital, Louisa squeezed her brother's hand tightly. "The baby, Raph. My baby," she murmured through tears. "It's going to be okay, Lou. I'm here with you," Raphael replied, but the worry in his eyes betrayed his confident words. Meanwhile, on social media, the incident's video already had millions of views. Hashtags like Taco Justice for Louisa and Protect Pregnant Women dominated trends. The case that began as a high-profile divorce now took on the contours of a national cause. At St. Thomas's Hospital, where Louisa was rushed as an emergency, a team was already waiting for her. Dr. Felicity Morris, a renowned obstetrician, immediately took over the case. "We need to monitor her and the baby's vital signs. Prepare the obstetric emergency room," the doctor commanded, as nurses transferred Louisa to a hospital gurney. Raphael was prevented from entering the examination room, remaining in the corridor, alternating between phone calls to family and silent prayers. It was then that he noticed Theodore's presence at the end of the corridor, trying to get information. "You're not getting near her," Raphael stated, positioning himself as a human wall between the businessman and the examination room door. "He's my son too, Raphael. I have a right to know how they are." "A right? You talk about rights after your girlfriend pushed my pregnant sister down a staircase in front of hundreds of people?" Before Theodore could respond, Dr. Morris exited the room, interrupting the confrontation. "Mr. Campbell, your sister is stabilized, but the impact caused a partial placental abruption. We will need to keep her under strict observation. The baby still has regular heartbeats, but the situation is delicate." Is she going to lose the baby?" Raphael asked, his voice choked. "We are doing everything possible to prevent that, but your sister will need absolute bed rest. Any additional stress could worsen the situation." Raphael nodded, while Theodore approached the doctor. "Dr. Montgomery Allister, I presume?" the doctor asked, recognizing the owner of the hospital network. "As the child's father, you have a right to information, but I must ask you to respect the delicate moment. The patient specifically requested that you not enter the room." Theodore seemed to wilt at the doctor's words. For the first time, his financial empire and influence seemed worthless. He nodded silently and moved away down the corridor, while Raphael finally received permission to see his sister. Louisa was pale, connected to monitors that recorded her and the baby's vital signs. Despite the situation, she tried to smile when she saw her brother. "How's my little warrior?" she asked, placing her hand on her belly. "Strong like her mother," Raphael replied, holding her hand. "Lou, what happened today? I won't let it go unpunished. I don't want revenge, Raph. I just want my baby to be born healthy." "It's not revenge, it's justice. And you'll get both. Your baby will be born perfectly healthy, and those two will pay for what they did." Outside the hospital, the first demonstrations were already forming. Women of all ages held signs with the words, "Justice for Louisa," and "Protect our pregnant women." The case that hours earlier was just an elite divorce now transformed into a symbol of the fight against violence against women, especially expectant mothers. In the studios of a major London television network, journalist Deborah Menzies prepared a special report on the case. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing with sources offering information about the couple's history. "I'm receiving reports that this isn't the first time Theodore Montgomery Allister has been accused of abusive behavior," she commented to her editor. "There are former employees of his hospitals with similar stories." "We need to be careful, Deborah. He's powerful and litigious. We need concrete proof." Deborah looked at the images of the assault repeating incessantly on the studio screens. "For the first time, we have concrete proof of what happens when power and impunity meet, and this time he won't be able to suppress the case." Meanwhile, at London's most prestigious law firm, Theodore met with his lawyers in a crisis room. "I want that video taken offline. Sue every outlet that's showing it," he demanded, banging the table. Dr. Caldwell sighed, adjusting his glasses. "Theodore, we need to be realistic. The incident occurred in a public space, with dozens of witnesses and multiple recordings. There's no legal basis to prevent its disclosure. What about Vanessa? What can we do for her? She was charged with assault and is being released after posting bail. But the case has taken on enormous proportions. The strategy now is to minimize damage." Theodore ran his hands over his face, feeling the empire he had built beginning to crumble beneath his feet. On the television in the corner of the room, images of Louisa's near fall repeated in an endless loop. Beside it, a photograph of him with Vanessa at a gala contrasted cruelly with the scene on the steps. Night fell over London, but the Montgomery Allister versus Campbell case was just beginning. In the corridors of St. Thomas's Hospital, Raphael stood, guard in his sister's room, while checking the messages that kept arriving on his phone. "How is she?" asked his colleague Marina Davies, also a lawyer, who arrived carrying a small bag with clothes for Louisa. "Stable, but the doctor said the next few days will be decisive," Raphael replied, exhausted. Marina touched his shoulder in a gesture of comfort. "The firm is with you. We'll transfer all your cases to other associates. You need to focus on your sister now." Raphael nodded, grateful for the support. "It's no longer just about the divorce, Marina. It's about justice. It's about showing that not even the powerful are above the law." Marina looked out the hospital window, where the improvised camp of protesters with lit candles could already be seen. "I think this time you won't be alone in this fight." Dawn broke over London with the news dominated by a single topic, the incident on the High Court steps. Images of Louisa Campbell's fall had spread like wildfire, generating a wave of national outrage. In room 507 of St. Thomas's Hospital, Louisa awoke from a restless sleep. The monitors beside the bed emitted rhythmic beeps tracking her and the babies. Heartbeats. Raphael, who had slept in the armchair nearby, immediately approached when he saw her wake. "Good morning, warrior," he said with a tired smile. "How do you feel?" Louisa adjusted herself in bed, feeling a twinge of pain. "Like I was hit by a truck," she replied, trying to maintain her good humor. "And the baby?" "He's strong and steady. Dr. Morris was here an hour ago and said his heartbeats are normalizing." A sigh of relief escaped Louisa's lips. She caressed her belly tenderly, as if apologizing to her son for the scare. "What's happening outside? I heard noise all night." Raphael hesitated. He didn't want to burden his sister with more worries, but he knew he couldn't hide the truth for long. Your case has become a symbol, Lou. There are protesters at the hospital door, on social media, everywhere. People are outraged by what happened. Before he could elaborate, the room door opened and Dr. Morris entered, accompanied by a nurse. "Good morning, Louisa. I see you had a good night, considering the circumstances," the doctor said, checking the monitors. "We'll do an ultrasound to check on our little fighter." While the ultrasound machine was being prepared, Raphael took the opportunity to check his phone. There were dozens of messages and missed calls, including several from Marina, his colleague. "Raf, things are getting intense," Marina's last message read. "The press won't stop calling the office, and we've discovered something about Theodore's past that you need to see urgently." Raphael frowned, intrigued and worried. What could Marina have discovered? The sound of the baby's heartbeats filled the room, bringing Raphael back to the present moment. On the ultrasound screen, the small figure moved, seemingly oblivious to the drama surrounding him. "Look, he's kicking!" exclaimed Dr. Morris, pointing to the screen. "He's a very resilient boy. The placenta still shows a small abruption, but it's in the process of stabilizing." Silent tears streamed down Louisa's face, a mixture of relief and gratitude. "When can I go home?" she asked. "Not so soon, Ms. Campbell. We need to keep you under observation for at least a week. After that, absolute bed rest at home until delivery." After the ultrasound, Louisa fell asleep again, exhausted by the physical and emotional stress. Raphael took the opportunity to leave the room and return the pending calls. "Marina, what did you find out?" he asked as soon as his colleague answered. "You need to come to the office, Raf. I had a visitor, a former employee of Theodore's hospital. She has information that could change everything." On the way to the office, Raphael couldn't ignore the city's transformation. At newsstands, screaming headlines, "Healthcare magnate puts pregnant wife at risk." On walls, recent graffiti, "Justice for Louisa." On a digital billboard on Oxford Street, a stylized image of a pregnant woman with the words, "Protect our mothers." The case had transcended the personal sphere, now it was a cause. At Campbell & Associates Law, firm Marina waited with a woman in her late 30s, visibly nervous. "Raphael, this is Christina Oliver. She worked as head nurse at Central London Hospital for 8 years, until she was dismissed 3 months ago." Christina extended a trembling hand. "Mr. Campbell, I saw what happened to your sister on television. I couldn't stay silent after that." "What do you have to tell us, Christina?" Raphael asked, indicating they should sit. The woman took a deep breath before beginning. "Theodore Montgomery Alastair is not the philanthropist he appears to be. Behind the scenes, he's known for his explosive temper and for harassing female employees. There's a system in place to silence victims, compensation, non-disclosure agreements, and for those who resist, dismissal and inclusion on an informal blacklist in the healthcare sector." Raphael felt a knot in his stomach. He had suspected something like this, based on the fragmented accounts Louisa shared, but hearing the confirmation was different. "Why were you dismissed, Christina?" "Because I refused to alter medical records. There was a patient, a young woman, who was admitted after a violent argument with her boyfriend, the son of an influential politician. Theodore personally asked me to modify the report, remove any mention of possible assault. When I refused, I was fired the next day under the pretext of incompatibility with the institution's values." Raphael and Marina exchanged significant glances. "Do you have any proof of this?" Marina asked carefully. Christina opened her bag and pulled out a flash drive. "I have emails, recordings of administrative meetings, and a list of employees who went through similar situations. Some might be willing to speak, especially after what happened to your sister." Raphael held the flash drive as if it were a precious and fragile treasure. "Christina, you understand that this could trigger a much larger process than a divorce, right? We're potentially talking about multiple accusations of harassment, falsification of medical documents." "I understand perfectly, and I'm ready. Seeing that pregnant young woman on the steps," her voice faltered, "I can no longer be complicit through my silence." After Christina left, Raphael and Marina spent hours analyzing the contents of the flash drive. The material was vast and incriminating. Emails discussing how to manage problematic employees, records of extraordinary payments classified as special compensation, and a list with the names of over 12 women who had received these payments in the last 5 years. "This completely changes the game, Raf," Marina commented, rubbing her tired eyes. "It's no longer just about Louisa's divorce. It's a pattern of behavior." Raphael agreed thoughtfully. "But we need to be strategic. Theodore has infinite resources and the best lawyers in the country. If we simply present this in court without a solid strategy, he can claim the documents were obtained illegally." "What about the press?" Marina suggested. "Public opinion is already against him." Raphael shook his head, determined. "No, we'll do this within the law, step by step. First, we need to contact these women on the list, see who's willing to speak. Then we'll formalize the complaints officially." Back at the hospital, Raphael found Louisa more awake and alert. On the television in the room, a debate show discussed the case, with experts in family law and women's rights advocates. "You're famous, little sister," Raphael joked, trying to lighten the mood. Louisa managed a weak smile. "I never wanted this, Raph. I just wanted to divorce in peace and start a new life with my son." Raphael sat by the bed, holding his sister's hand. "Lou, I need to ask you something important. During your marriage to Theodore, were there other incidents of aggression, anything that might indicate a pattern?" The silence that followed was more eloquent than any answer. Tears began to well in Louisa's eyes. "They weren't physical assaults, at least not at first," she finally replied, her voice almost a whisper. "It was more control. He monitored my phone, questioned my friendships, criticized my clothes. When I started working at the foundation, he made a point of calling me several times a day, always with some emergency that required me to come home." Raphael felt anger growing within him, but kept his expression neutral, encouraging his sister to continue. Then came the episodes of explosion. Shouting, broken objects, veiled threats. He never hit me, but there were times I was sure it would happen. It gradually worsened, until I discovered I was pregnant. For a while things got better. He seemed genuinely happy. But then came Vanessa, Raphael completed. Louisa nodded. "I found out by chance. A message he forgot to delete. When I confronted him, he didn't even deny it. He said I was too focused on the pregnancy, that I wasn't the same anymore, that he had needs. That same night, I decided I would leave as soon as the baby was born. I started saving money, documenting our joint accounts, planning a safe exit. But he found out." "How?" "He found notes in my diary. He had a fit of rage like I'd never seen. He said I would never take his child, that he would destroy my reputation, that no one would believe me against him." Louisa paused, breathing deeply before continuing. "That's when I realized I needed to leave immediately. I called you that night, remember? I left with just one suitcase while he was at a business meeting. 3 days later, I filed for divorce." Raphael felt a mix of pride and protectiveness for his sister. He had always seen her as strong and independent, and now he understood how much that strength had been tested. "Lou, you're no longer alone in this fight, and you're not the only one who suffered at his hands." He then shared what he had discovered through Christina, carefully omitting details that might stress his sister. "This man built an empire based on appearances, Lou, but now the mask is falling." Before Louisa could respond, nurse entered the room. "Ms. Campbell, there's someone insisting on seeing you. Says she's your friend, Deborah Menzies." Louisa seemed surprised. "The journalist? She's not my friend. She was just at the courthouse yesterday." Raphael intervened. "Please tell her my sister is not receiving visitors." The nurse nodded and left, but a few minutes later the room phone rang. Raphael answered, cautious. "Mr. Campbell, this is Deborah Menzies. I understand your concern, but I'm not here as a journalist. I have information that could be crucial to your sister's case." Raphael hesitated, looking at Louisa. She made a small affirmative gesture. "5 minutes," he replied before hanging up. Deborah arrived at the room bringing not only a bouquet of flowers, but also a brown envelope. "How are you feeling?" she asked Louisa with genuine concern. "I've been better, but we're fighting," Louisa replied, indicating her belly. Deborah smiled briefly before adopting a more serious expression. "I came because I received something you need to see. An anonymous source sent this to the newsroom earlier today." She opened the envelope, revealing photographs. In them, Theodore appeared alongside Vanessa at meetings that clearly preceded the official start of their relationship. Dating. Back at least a year earlier, a period when he was still living with Louisa. "There's more," Deborah continued, pulling out a second set of images. "These are from a security camera in the building where Vanessa lives. They show Theodore and her discussing Louisa's situation. The quality isn't great and there's no audio, but a lip-reading expert we consulted suggests they were planning how to deal with the problem." Raphael examined the images carefully, feeling a chill. "Are you suggesting that what happened on the steps—" "I'm not suggesting anything," Deborah interrupted. "I'm just sharing evidence that came into my hands. What you do with it is your decision." "Why are you helping us?" Louisa asked, suspicious. "This would make an excellent exclusive story." Deborah hesitated, a visible conflict on her face. "Let's just say I have personal reasons for not tolerating men who abuse their power against women. And yes, this would make an excellent story, but some things are more important than headlines." After Deborah left, Raphael and Louisa silently analyzed the new material. "What do you think, Raph? Do you think it was premeditated?" Raphael pondered carefully before answering. "I don't know, Lou, but we will find out. The important thing now is for you to recover and ensure this little warrior is born healthy. The rest, leave it to me." Meanwhile, in a penthouse in Kensington, Theodore Montgomery Alistair stared at the city from the panoramic window, a glass of whiskey in hand. On the television, commentators hotly debated his case. His phone vibrated incessantly with notifications, advisors requesting emergency meetings, business partners concerned about their brand's association with the scandal. "Did you see that?" he asked Vanessa, who was sitting on the sofa, visibly distraught. "They're crucifying us in the media." Vanessa didn't respond. Immediately. Her eyes were fixed on the screen, where a photograph of Louisa in the hospital circulated with the caption, "Victim remains under medical observation after assault." "It was an accident, Theodore," she finally said, her voice choked. "I never meant to hurt her, much less the baby." Theodore laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "Accident or not, the damage is done. Hospital shares fell 15% today. Sponsors are suspending contracts. The charity foundation is considering removing my name. Everything I worked for—" Theodore's phone rang again. He checked the display and answered immediately. "Dr. Caldwell, any news?" he asked, referring to his lead attorney. Theodore's expression darkened as he listened. "What? That's impossible. Who leaked this? Find and fire them immediately." He hung up, throwing the phone onto the sofa. "What happened?" Vanessa asked, alarmed. "Someone is providing internal hospital information to Louisa's legal team, payment records, non-disclosure agreements. Dr. Caldwell was just informed that they're building a much bigger case than a simple divorce." The silence that followed was heavy as lead. For the first time, Vanessa saw something she never imagined seeing on Theodore's face: fear. At St. Thomas's Hospital, night fell over the city. Louisa finally managed to rest, with Raphael standing guard in the armchair nearby. In the corridor, a security guard hired by the law firm ensured that no unwanted visitors disturbed the patient's rest. In Raphael's hand, the flash drive with Christina's information and the envelope with the photographs provided by Deborah represented much more than evidence. They were the promise that, this time, the truth would not be silenced. Outside the hospital, the camp of supporters had grown. Women and men of all ages took turns in vigils holding signs, singing songs of hope and solidarity. In their hands, lit candles formed, a sea of light in the darkness of the London night. The case that began as a troubled divorce now symbolized much more. It was the cry of all those who, for too long, had been forced to remain silent. A week had passed since the incident on the courthouse steps. Through the window of room 507 at St. Thomas's Hospital, Louisa watched the fine rain falling over London, creating a grey veil that enveloped the buildings. The doctors had finally authorized her discharge for the following day, provided she maintained absolute bed rest at home. "Thinking about what?" asked Raphael, entering the room with a bouquet of fresh sunflowers. Louisa smiled at the yellow flowers, her favorites since childhood. "How life changes in a matter of seconds. A week ago, I was just another woman trying to get a divorce. Now, I'm a symbol of something bigger that I can't even fully comprehend." Raphael placed the flowers in a vase and sat on the edge of the bed. "It's because your story touched on something many people feel, Lou. The impunity of the powerful, the systematic silencing of victims, the fragility of the systems that should protect us." He paused before continuing. "Speaking of which, we have news. Judge Finch has scheduled an extraordinary hearing for tomorrow. Given the circumstances and the repercussion of the case, he decided to expedite the process." "Do you think I should be present?" Louisa asked, concerned. "Absolutely not. You just received discharge authorization on the condition of absolute bed rest. Marina and I will represent you. In fact, she's been doing an incredible job." Louisa nodded, grateful for her brother's team's dedication. "What about Christina's information and Deborah's photos?" "We're prepared. We've gathered testimonies from 5 former hospital employees who confirm Theodore's pattern of behavior. 3 of them have agreed to testify. And as for the photos, well, they'll be our ace in the hole depending on how the defense behaves." Raphael's phone vibrated. It was a message from Marina. "Urgent. New witness contacted us. Says she's Theodore's former personal assistant. Wants to speak only with you. I'm sending her to the office at 4 p.m. Raphael frowned, intrigued. "I have to go to the office, Lou. Something important came up." "Go, I'll be fine. Dr. Morris said she'll stop by later for the final exams before discharge." Raphael kissed his sister's forehead and left, not before checking with the security guard at the door that everything was in order. On the way to the office, Raphael couldn't ignore the signs of how the case had captured national attention. At newsstands, magazines displayed screaming headlines about the Campbell vs. Montgomery Allister case. On radios, heated debates about domestic violence and abuse of power. On a mural on Oxford Street, new graffiti, a pregnant woman with a halo of light, and the phrase maternal resistance written in stylized letters. At Campbell & Associates law firm, Marina waited with a young woman of about 25, her hair neatly tied in a bun, and eyes that revealed sleepless nights. "Raphael, this is Patricia Lyons. She worked as Theodore Montgomery Allister's personal assistant for 2 years, until 3 months ago." Patricia extended her hand, visibly nervous. "Mr. Campbell, thank you for seeing me. I didn't know if I should come, but after seeing what happened to your sister and all those people supporting her—" "You did the right thing, Patricia," Raphael reassured her, indicating she should sit. "Any information can be crucial." The young woman took a deep breath before beginning. "I worked directly with Dr. Montgomery Allister for 2 years. As his personal assistant, I had access to practically everything. His schedule, emails, calls, even family matters. I saw firsthand how he treated your sister." Patricia opened her bag and pulled out a notebook. "I kept a diary. I know it might seem strange, but it was my way of dealing with the pressure. I wrote everything down. The episodes of rage, the derogatory comments about Miss Campbell, the veiled threats." Raphael leafed through the notebook, impressed by the level of detail. "Patricia, this is extremely valuable. But why did you keep it? Weren't you afraid of being discovered?" The young woman lowered her eyes. "At first, it was just a way to vent. Then it started to feel like insurance. I saw how he discarded people who became inconvenient. I saw employees fired for much less than a defiant look. The notebook was my protection." "And why did you decide to leave 3 months ago?" Patricia hesitated, biting her lower lip. "Because I realized I was becoming complicit. The last straw was when Miss Campbell found out about the relationship with Miss Price. I had known for months. I organized the meetings, booked hotels, bought gifts, all while watching your sister pregnant, trying to save her marriage." A tear streamed down the young woman's face. "The day she found out, Dr. Montgomery Allister had a fit of rage in the office. He broke objects, shouted that no one would take his child from him, that he would destroy her reputation if necessary. I was terrified. I resigned the next day. Raphael and Marina exchanged significant glances. "And he accepted your resignation just like that, calmly?" Marina asked, suspicious. "Not exactly. I was called to his office. He offered a raise, then tried to intimidate me. Finally, he proposed a non-disclosure agreement with good compensation. I signed because I needed the money and feared retaliation, but the agreement didn't specifically mention my personal diary." Raphael leafed through a few more pages of the notebook, stopping at a specific entry. "This here, you wrote about a meeting between Theodore and Vanessa 2 weeks before the incident at the courthouse." Patricia nodded, her face pale. "They were in his office, thinking they were alone. I heard Vanessa say they needed to do something to stop Louisa from pursuing the case, that she was ruining their reputation, and Dr. Montgomery Alistair replied that he would take care of it, that Louisa would learn a lesson." Raphael felt a shiver run down his spine. "Patricia, would you be willing to testify to this in court? I understand the risks involved, but—" "That's why I'm here, Mr. Campbell. No more silence, no more complicity." After Patricia left, Raphael and Marina worked late, reorganizing their strategy for the next day's hearing. "This changes everything, Marina. It's no longer just about domestic violence or a troubled divorce. We're potentially talking about a premeditated assault." Marina agreed, concerned. "We need to be careful. Raph, Theodore has connections everywhere. If he suspects what we have, that's why we'll use the element of surprise. Tomorrow, we'll let them present their version first. Let them build the narrative of the unfortunate accident. Then, we'll demolish that story piece by piece." The next morning, the High Court of Justice in London was surrounded by an even larger crowd than on the day of the incident. Protesters held signs with Louisa's face and phrases like "justice for all" and "no more women." The police had set up a cordon to ensure the entry and exit of those involved. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was palpably tense. On one side, Raphael and Marina, representing Louisa. On the other, Theodore with his team of lawyers, led by Dr. Caldwell. Vanessa sat a few seats behind, visibly distraught and isolated. Judge Finch entered the room and everyone rose. This extraordinary hearing was convened due to the exceptional circumstances surrounding the divorce proceedings between Louisa Campbell and Theodore Montgomery Alistair. Due to the incident that occurred on the premises of this court and Ms. Campbell's health condition, I have decided to accelerate the procedures. He paused, looking directly at the parties involved. "I must emphasize that although this case has gained public notoriety, this court relies exclusively on facts and evidence, not on media pressure or popular opinion. Dr. Caldwell, as requested, the defense may begin." Theodore's lawyer rose with the confidence of someone who had won hundreds of similar cases. "Your Honor, first and foremost, my client would like to express his deepest regret for what happened to Ms. Campbell. Her and the baby's well-being have always been and continue to be his greatest concern." Raphael almost laughed at the hypocrisy, but maintained a neutral expression. "What we witnessed on the steps of this court was a tragic accident, the result of an emotionally charged situation. Ms. Price, my client's current partner, attempted an approach that, unfortunately, resulted in an imbalance. At no time was there any intention to cause harm." Dr. Caldwell then presented a series of arguments: Theodore's history as a respected businessman in the healthcare sector, his philanthropic contributions, his genuine concern for his unborn child. He concluded by suggesting a generous settlement that would include a mansion in Belgravia for Louisa, a lifelong pension, and a multi-million-pound fund for the child. My client is willing to set aside differences and focus on his child's well-being. We hope that Ms. Campbell, once recovered, can see beyond the unfortunate incident and consider what is best for the child." Raphael noted the strategy. Try to portray Theodore as a concerned, generous father, willing to forgive and move on, to transform the incident into an unfortunate accident and position any resistance from Louisa as unreasonable or vindictive. When it was his turn, Raphael rose calmly. "Your Honor, It is admirable how Dr. Caldwell manages to transform an act of violence documented in dozens of videos into an unfortunate accident. It is impressive how he manages to portray a man with a systematic history of abuse of power as a concerned and generous father. The room fell silent, surprised by the harshness of the initial words. What we witnessed on the steps of this court was not an accident. It was the climax of a long history of controlling and abusive behavior, and we have concrete evidence of this. Raphael then began to methodically present the collected material, the testimonies of the former employees, the records of payments classified as special compensation, Patricia's detailed diary. But most disturbing, Your Honor, is that we have reason to believe the incident was premeditated. A murmur ran through the room. Theodore, who until then had maintained an impassive expression, straightened in his chair, visibly alarmed. Raphael presented the photographs provided by Deborah, showing the relationship between Theodore and Vanessa much earlier than they had admitted. Then he played an audio extracted from Patricia's phone. "She's ruining our reputation. We need to do something." Vanessa's voice was unmistakable. "I'll take care of it. Louisa will learn a lesson." Theodore's grave voice responded. The room erupted in comments. Judge Finch banged his gavel, repeatedly demanding order. "Silence, Dr. Caldwell. Your client seems quite distraught. Would you like to request a recess?" Indeed, Theodore was livid, his knuckles white from gripping the table in front of him. Dr. Caldwell, normally composed, seemed equally disconcerted. "No, that won't be necessary, Your Honor. We would like to question the admissibility of this evidence. The audio was clearly obtained without consent, and—" The audio was recorded by the defendant's personal assistant in a workspace during business hours, Raphael interrupted. "There is no expectation of privacy under these conditions, according to established jurisprudence." Judge Finch considered for a moment. "The court accepts the evidence presented. Dr. Caldwell, your objection has been noted. Proceed, Mr. Campbell." Raphael then called his first witness, Christina Oliver, the former head nurse. In a firm voice, she detailed the toxic environment in the hospitals managed by Theodore, the cases of moral and sexual harassment, and how complaints were systematically suppressed. The second witness was a former secretary of the hospital's board of directors, who confirmed the improper payments and non-disclosure agreements. Finally, Patricia Lyons was called. Visibly nervous but determined, she narrated her 2 years working directly with Theodore. She confirmed the authenticity of the diary and the audio, and detailed the troubled relationship between Theodore and Louisa, especially after the discovery of the pregnancy. "He saw the baby as property, not as a life," she concluded. "I heard him say several times that no one would take his child from him, as if Ms. Campbell was just a temporary incubator." When cross-examination began, Dr. Caldwell tried to discredit the witnesses, suggesting personal motivations, resentment over dismissals, opportunism in the face of the case's notoriety. But the documentary evidence was too solid to be shaken. The most tense moment came when Raphael requested that Vanessa Price be called to the witness stand. Initially, she maintained the narrative of the unfortunate accident. When confronted with the evidence, especially the audio, she tried to minimize it. "We were just venting. Everyone says things in the heat of the moment." Raphael then showed images from Vanessa's building security cameras, captured 2 days before the incident. In them, Theodore and Vanessa were seen in a heated discussion, with gestures that suggested planning. "Ms. Price, do you want us to believe it was a coincidence that you confronted Louisa Campbell exactly on the steps, the most dangerous place, in the courthouse, especially for a woman in an advanced state of pregnancy?" Vanessa paled, glancing quickly at Theodore, who kept his gaze fixed ahead. It wasn't planned. I was nervous, irritated. Irritated enough to push an 8-month pregnant woman down a marble staircase? It wasn't like that. I just wanted her to leave us alone." The inadvertent confession silenced the room. Vanessa, realizing what she had said, covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes wide. Judge Finch observed the scene with a grave expression before announcing, "This court will take a 1-hour recess. When we return, I expect to hear the closing arguments from both parties." During the recess, the courthouse corridor buzzed with journalists and onlookers, trying to get information. Raphael took the opportunity to call Louisa and update her on the events. "How are you feeling in the new apartment?" he asked, trying to start with something light. "Safer than I've been in years," Louisa replied. "Dr. Morris came by to check my vital signs and said both the baby and I are stable. And the trial?" Raphael smiled, feeling the weight of the last few days begin to dissipate. "We won, Lou. On all counts, the judge went beyond what we expected." On the other end of the line, he heard a stifled sob. "Thank you, Raph, for everything, for believing in me when I didn't even have the strength myself. You're the real hero of this story, Lou. I just gave you legal support." As he packed his documents, Raphael noticed Vanessa hesitantly approaching, accompanied by Dr. Helen Vance. "Mr. Campbell," she began, her voice low and unsure, "I wanted to apologize personally for what I did to your sister. I know words aren't enough and she probably can never forgive me, but—" "Ms. Price," Raphael interrupted gently, "what happened was serious and there will be legal consequences. But the fact that you decided to speak the truth, especially considering your own vulnerable situation, means a lot. As for forgiveness, that is something only time will tell." Dr. Vance placed a hand on Vanessa's shoulder. "We are taking all measures to ensure her and the baby's safety, and she is committed to fully cooperating with the investigations." Raphael nodded, impressed by the transformation in the woman before him. Where he once saw arrogance and disdain, he now perceived only fragility and genuine regret. "If you need any specific legal assistance for your situation, my door is open," he offered. As he left the courthouse, Raphael was surprised by a wave of applause. The people gathered on the steps, those same steps, had heard the news of the verdict and celebrated what they considered a victory not only for Louisa, but for all women who had been silenced by power and fear. Among the crowd, Raphael recognized faces: Christina, the former nurse; Patricia, the former assistant; other women who had testified or submitted statements, all united not only by the shared experience of abuse, but also by the collective courage to finally speak. The rain began to fall again, soft but persistent. People opened colorful umbrellas, creating a vibrant mosaic against the gray of the courthouse. Instead of dispersing, they remained firm, as if the rain represented not an inconvenience but a kind of purification. 3 months passed. Winter gave way to spring in London. On the avenues, laburnum trees exploded in color, announcing a cycle of renewal. In the hospital room of St. Mary's maternity ward, Louisa held her newborn son Anthony in her arms. The birth had been difficult, but without serious complications. Both mother and baby were healthy and strong. Raphael watched the scene with tears in his eyes, unable to contain his emotion. The journey of the past few months had been exhausting, but seeing his sister holding her nephew, both safe and well, made it all worthwhile. "He's perfect, Lou," he said, approaching to gently touch the baby's tiny hand. "He's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," Louisa replied, without taking her eyes off her son. "You know what's most incredible? Despite everything we went through to get here, looking at him, I feel only gratitude and love. No resentment, no bitterness." Raphael smiled, admiring his sister's inner strength. Few people would have emerged from such an ordeal with such grace and serenity. "How are things out there?" Louisa asked, finally diverting her gaze from the baby. "The world keeps turning. The case continues to reverberate, though with less intensity. Theodore was formally indicted by the Crown Prosecution Service, both for the assault against you and for other charges related to hospital practices. Most of the board members resigned and shares plummeted. There are rumors he's negotiating a plea bargain to avoid prison." "And Vanessa?" Raphael hesitated, unsure how Louisa would react. "She's cooperating with the authorities. She made a cooperation agreement. She's 5 months pregnant, living in a protected location." To his surprise, Louisa nodded calmly. "I hope she finds peace, and that her baby is born healthy like our Anthony." Raphael took his sister's hand, squeezing it lightly. "You never cease to amaze me with your capacity for compassion." Louisa smiled, a smile that finally reached her eyes, something Raphael hadn't seen in a long time. It's not compassion, it's liberation. Realizing that I don't need to carry hatred or resentment, that I can choose what I take with me into this new phase. A soft knock on the door interrupted the conversation. It was Marina, bringing a colorful bouquet of spring flowers. "May I meet the newest member of the Campbell family?" she asked, smiling. Louisa gestured for her to approach. "Marina, meet Anthony Campbell. Anthony, this is Aunt Marina, who helped your mother find her voice." Marina leaned in to admire the baby, clearly moved. "He's beautiful, Louisa. And he has your eyes." The three people remained silent for a few moments, contemplating the small life that, against all odds, had come into the world strong and healthy. "Oh, I almost forgot," Marina said, opening her briefcase. "The document you asked for is ready. We just need your signature." She handed a set of papers to Louisa, who examined them carefully before nodding. "It's perfect. Exactly what I imagined." Raphael looked over his sister's shoulder, curious. "What is it?" "The charter of the Phoenix Foundation," Louisa replied. "Remember that compensation for moral damages? I decided I don't want that money for myself. I want to use it to create a support space for women in similar situations to what I experienced." Raphael and Marina exchanged glances of surprise and admiration. "That's a wonderful idea, Lou. But are you sure? That money could secure your and Anthony's future. We are well secured with the asset division and the pension. This money has a different purpose. It needs to transform into something positive, something that helps break cycles of abuse and silencing." In the following months, as Anthony grew strong and healthy, Louisa dedicated her energies to the foundation project. Working remotely while caring for her son, she developed the organization's structure with the help of Raphael, Marina, and a team of professionals committed to the cause. The Phoenix Foundation would be strategically located in an annex building to the High Court of Justice, the very place where it all began. The ambitious but practical project would include free legal assistance, psychological support, temporary shelter for vulnerable women, and an educational program aimed at preventing and early identifying abusive relationships. When Anthony turned 1 year old, the foundation was ready to be inaugurated. The chosen date was no accident, exactly 1 year after the incident on the steps. On the morning of the inauguration, the High Court of Justice in London was unrecognizable. The austere marble steps, once a symbol of a moment of terror, were now decorated with yellow flowers, Louisa's favorite sunflowers. Colorful banners with messages of hope and empowerment replaced the institutional gray. A crowd gathered for the ceremony, even larger than on the days of the trial. Women and men of all ages, representatives of human rights organizations, political figures, national and international press, all united to witness not only the opening of a foundation, but the realization of a journey of transformation. Louisa arrived with Anthony in her arms, accompanied by Raphael. She wore a simple yellow dress, which contrasted with her dark hair, now cut in a shorter, more modern style. Her face, once marked by fear and anxiety, now radiated serenity and determination. On the podium installed at the top of the steps, she adjusted the microphone while Raphael held Anthony. "Exactly 1 year ago," she began, her voice clear and firm, "I fell on these steps. It was a moment of terror, which almost cost my life and my son's. But today, we are here to transform that place of pain into a space of rebirth." She paused, looking at the attentive crowd. "The Phoenix Foundation is born not only from my personal story, but from the stories of all the Christinas, Patricias, and so many other women who, for too long, were forced to remain silent. It is born from the collective courage to say no more to abuse, to manipulation, to silencing." Louisa then invited some of the women who had testified in the case to the stage: Christina, Patricia, and other former hospital employees. Each received a yellow flower and briefly shared their story. "These women," Louisa continued, "are the true strength behind this foundation. Without their courage to speak, I would still be trapped in a cycle of abuse. And there are so many others whose voices have yet to be heard, for whom this space will be a refuge and a starting point for a new life." In the middle of the crowd, partially hidden by a hat and dark glasses, was Vanessa Price. Her own son, just 3 months old, slept peacefully in her arms. She had not been officially invited, but felt the need to be present, to witness the transformation of a moment of violence into something constructive. Louisa from the podium saw her. Their gazes met briefly. There was no smile or wave, just a silent recognition, a mutual understanding that both had been, in different ways, victims of the same system of abuse and control. After the speeches, the inaugural ribbon was cut, and the doors of the Phoenix Foundation were opened to the public. The space, carefully designed, combined functionality and welcome. Walls in soft tones, artworks created by survivors of violence, a playroom for the children of the women attended, legal and psychological counseling rooms, and a community library. At the main entrance, a bronze plaque displayed the Foundation's mission. Dedicated to all those who refuse to remain silent and to those who one day will find their voice. As guests explored the space, Louisa discreetly moved away. With Anthony once again in her arms and Raphael by her side, she headed to the steps. She stopped exactly on the step where she had fallen a year earlier. Taking a deep breath, she placed a single yellow flower there. "This is our closing," she said softly to her brother, "and also our new beginning." Raphael nodded, too emotional to speak. Together they slowly descended the steps, no longer a place of fear, but a path to something new and hopeful. In the following years, the Phoenix Foundation would become a national reference in supporting victims of violence and abusive relationships. Thousands of women would find there not only practical assistance, but also the strength to rebuild their lives with dignity and autonomy. And whenever someone asked Louisa how she had managed to transform such a traumatic experience into something so positive, she replied with simplicity, "Because I understood that true freedom is not in escaping abuse, but in using that experience to prevent others from going through the same. I am not just a survivor, I am a transformer." On a sunny spring afternoon, 5 years after the Foundation's inauguration, Louisa walked down the same steps, now hand in hand with Anthony, a joyful and energetic 6-year-old boy. He skipped down the steps, completely oblivious to the historical significance of the place for his mother. "Mummy, can I go play in the Foundation's garden?" he asked, pointing to the green space adjacent to the building, where other children were already having fun. "Of course, my love, I'll be right there at the entrance talking with Aunt Marina." As she watched her son run happily towards the garden, Louisa couldn't help but reflect on how life had run its course, healing wounds, opening new paths. The fear that once paralyzed her had transformed into strength and determination. The steps that almost took everything from her were now just another path on her daily journey. At the top of the steps, she paused for a moment, looking at the city that stretched out below. London, with its contrasts and contradictions, its challenges and opportunities. A metropolis where stories of despair and hope constantly intertwined. Marina approached, interrupting her thoughts. "What are you reflecting on so deeply?" Louisa smiled, indicating the view before her, "On how surprising life is, on how we can fall and rise transformed, on how a fall can become a flight." The two women remained silent for a few moments, contemplating the city and all the stories it contained, the known ones and those yet to be written. "Shall we go?" Marina finally asked. "The board meeting is about to start." Louisa nodded, taking one last look at the garden where Anthony played happily with other children. Children of women who found in the Phoenix Foundation not only support, but the chance to rewrite their own stories. With firm steps and her head held high, she entered the building that had once been a symbol of her greatest fear, and which now represented her greatest triumph, the transformation of pain into purpose, of silence into voice, of a fall into an ascent.